Elijah Moore had not spoken more than 10 words to another human being in over 3 months. At 48, he had perfected the art of self-sufficiency on his 20 acres of fertile land in the Virginia countryside. His weathered hands knew every inch of soil, every fence post, every tool in his modest barn. The locals in the nearby town of Millfield had long ago stopped trying to engage the taciturn farmer in conversation, respecting his desire for solitude. Even if they didn't understand it, the late September sun beat down on Elijah's back as he harvested the last of his summer wheat. His once dark hair, now streaked with gray, stuck to his forehead with sweat. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising relief from the unseasonable heat. Elijah's only companions were the sounds of nature birds calling from the oak. If this story of simple kindness is moving you, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to No Filter America. Your support helps us share more true stories that remind us how one good deed can change everything. Elijah stood frozen in the doorway, conflicted. Every instinct told him to send the stranger away to protect the sanctuary of solitude he'd built. Yet something about the old man's dignified bearing, despite his obvious vulnerability, stirred something long dormant in Elijah's chest. "Come in," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. "You'll catch your death out there." Relief washed over the blind man's face. "Thank you, kind sir. I am Nathaniel." He extended his hand in the general direction of Elijah's voice. After a moment's hesitation, Elijah took it. Elijah Moore. Inside, Elijah awkwardly set about helping his unexpected guest. He found dry clothes too large but serviceable, and showed Nathaniel to the rocking chair by the fire. The blind man moved with surprising grace, once given basic directions about the layout of the room. "Something smells wonderful," Nathaniel observed, as he warmed his hands by the stove. "Just bread," Elijah replied, checking on his dough, which had risen perfectly. "Ah, homemade bread. There are few greater pleasures in this world," Nathaniel said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his cloudy eyes. As the bread baked, filling the small house with its comforting aroma, Elijah found himself answering Nathaniel's gentle questions about his farm, his crops, the weather patterns of the region. It was more conversation than he'd had in years. And though part of him resisted, another part, a part he thought long dead, remembered what it was like to share words with another soul. When the bread was done, golden brown and fragrant, Elijah cut 2 thick slices. He placed one in Nathaniel's outstretched hands, watching as the old man brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply before taking a bite. "This," Nathaniel declared, "is bread made with skill and care. You have a gift, Elijah Moore." That night, the blind beggar slept on a pallet by the fire, and Elijah lay awake in his bed, unsettled by how quickly his carefully constructed isolation had been breached by a simple act of kindness. Dawn broke clear and bright after the storm, sunlight streaming through the small windows of Elijah's farmhouse. He rose early, as was his habit, and found Nathaniel already awake, sitting perfectly straight in the rocking chair, his unseeing eyes turned toward the window, as if enjoying the warmth of the morning sun on his face. "You have chickens," Nathaniel observed as Elijah entered the room. "I can hear them clucking in the yard." 5 hens, Elijah confirmed, surprised by the old man's acute hearing. "I should go collect the eggs. May I join you?" Nathaniel asked. "I promise not to be a burden. The fresh air would do me good after the journey." Elijah hesitated. His morning routine was sacred, the quiet solitude of early chores, the methodical rhythm of caring for his animals. But he found himself nodding, then remembering Nathaniel couldn't see the gesture. "All right," he said, "but the ground's muddy from the rain." Together they stepped into the crisp morning air, Nathaniel's hand resting lightly on Elijah's arm for guidance. As they moved around the farm, Elijah found himself describing things he normally took for granted. the way the apple trees were beginning to show their fall colors, how the wheat field looked golden in the morning light, the fat rabbits that darted at the edge of the forest. "You have a poet's eye, Elijah Moore," Nathaniel commented. "You see beauty in this land." Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "It's just a farm." "No," Nathaniel said with gentle certainty. "It's a sanctuary. I can feel it. This land has absorbed your grief, carried it for you when it was too heavy to bear alone." Elijah stopped abruptly. "How did you—" "Lost Lee's echoes," Nathaniel said simply. "I may be blind, but I hear them clearly. Someone you loved is gone." "My wife," Elijah admitted, the words rough in his throat. "And our baby," Nathaniel nodded. "And so you came here to disappear." They had just finished a simple breakfast of eggs and leftover bread when the sound of vehicles approaching broke the morning quiet. Elijah frowned. The gravel road leading to his farm saw little traffic, the occasional delivery truck, sometimes. The mail carrier, but never this early. "Are you expecting visitors?" Nathaniel asked, his head tilted toward the sound. "Never," Elijah replied, moving to the window. What he saw made him blink in disbelief. A procession of sleek black vehicles was making its way up his drive, 3 large SUVs with tinted windows, followed by a gleaming silver limousine and 2 more SUVs behind it. All bore small flags on their hoods that Elijah didn't recognize blue, with some sort of golden emblem. "What is it?" Nathaniel asked, sensing Elijah's confusion. "Cars," Elijah said, watching as the procession came to a halt at his gate. "Fancy ones, a lot of them." Men in dark suits emerged from the lead vehicles, scanning the area with alert eyes. One spoke into a wrist communicator. Another approached the gate, examining the simple chain and padlock that secured it. "I should see what they want," Elijah said, suddenly aware of his worn clothes and unshaven face. As he stepped onto the porch, the rear door of the limousine opened. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair and an impeccably tailored suit stepped out. Even from a distance, Elijah could see the man's commanding presence and the deference shown to him by the others. "Wait," Nathaniel called from behind him. "I should come with you." "Why?" Elijah asked, puzzled by the old man's insistence. Nathaniel smiled enigmatically. "Because I believe they may be looking for me." Elijah led Nathaniel carefully down the porch steps and across the muddy yard toward the gate, increasingly aware of the incongruity of the situation. His simple farm, his isolated existence, now confronted by whatever this was. As they approached, the silver-haired man's eyes fixed on Nathaniel, and a look of profound relief crossed his face. "Your Royal Highness," he called out, his accent distinctly foreign European, perhaps. "Thank God you are safe." Elijah stopped dead in his tracks, turning to stare at Nathaniel. "Royal ... What?" Nathaniel sighed, his expression both apologetic and amused. "I may have neglected to mention a few details about myself." The man at the gate barked orders, and immediately the suited security personnel began opening the gate, their movements efficient and practiced. The silver-haired man approached, bowing deeply to Nathaniel before addressing Elijah. "Sir, I am Anton Vasilis, Royal Chamberlain to His Majesty King Nathaniel of Vasaria. We are eternally grateful that you have sheltered our monarch." His English was perfect, but formal, with a slight accent Elijah couldn't place. "King?" Elijah repeated, feeling as if he'd stepped into someone else's life. Nathaniel, or rather King Nathaniel, placed a gentle hand on Elijah's shoulder. "I apologize for the deception, my friend. When one has lived as long as I have in the public eye, anonymity becomes a precious gift. Sometimes I travel quietly, without my title, to remember what it is to be simply a man." The gate now open. More security personnel approached, along with a woman carrying what appeared to be medical equipment. The royal entourage was prepared to sweep their monarch back into his official life. Our diplomatic convoy was separated. During the storm, Anton explained, His Majesty's vehicle was forced off the road. We've been searching all night. Elijah stood silent, trying to reconcile the humble blind beggar who had shared his bread with this revelation. A king at his table, sleeping by his fire. Mr. Moore, Anton continued, His Majesty's schedule is quite pressing. We are due in Washington for a state visit, and there are security concerns we must address. If you would be so kind as to allow, used to collect His Majesty's belongings. But King Nathaniel raised a hand, silencing his chamberlain. My schedule, he said with quiet authority, can wait. Mr. Moore and I were in the middle of a conversation about his farm. I would like to continue it. Anton's professional composure slipped momentarily, revealing surprise. But Your Majesty, the Secretary of State is expecting. The Secretary of State has waited for kings before. Nathaniel replied with a smile. He can wait a little longer for this one. Turning his cloudy eyes toward Elijah, the king added, That is, if my host is willing to endure the inconvenience of a royal visit a bit longer. Elijah looked from the king to the impressive delegation. Waiting at his gate, a scene so far removed from his quiet existence that it seemed almost dreamlike. Part of him wanted nothing more than for all of them to leave, to return to his solitude, his routine, his carefully maintained isolation. Yet another part, the part that had begun to stir when he shared his bread with a stranger, was curious about what might happen. Next, Elijah's small farmhouse had never seen such activity. While King Nathaniel and Elijah returned to the kitchen table, the royal security detail established a perimeter around the property. Communications equipment was set up in one of the SUVs. Aides hurried about with satellite phones and tablets, rescheduling meetings and placating officials. Inside, however, a different scene unfolded. Elijah, still processing the morning's revelations, found himself brewing coffee for a king at his warm kitchen table. Your security people won't like that you're staying here, Elijah observed, setting down 2 mugs of steaming coffee. Nathaniel smiled, his cloudy eyes crinkling at the corners. They rarely approve of my decisions. It's the burden of their profession to imagine danger everywhere. He found his mug with practiced ease. But I've learned that the most meaningful moments of my life have never happened inside security perimeters. Anton, the chamberlain, stood uncomfortably by the door, trying to maintain his composure in the humble surroundings. Your Majesty, Dr. Keller should examine you, and there are urgent matters requiring your attention. Anton has served me faithfully for 30 years, Nathaniel explained to Elijah. He believes monarchy is synonymous with endless meetings. It is your duty, sir, Anton replied stiffly. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, but so is understanding the people I serve. And sometimes that means sitting at a farmer's table, drinking his coffee and listening. He turned toward Elijah. You were telling me about how you built this place. Continue, please. Despite his discomfort with the situation, Elijah found himself talking. He described buying the abandoned farm after Sarah's death, the backbreaking work of restoring the fields, the solace he found in coaxing life from the soil. As he spoke, he realized how long it had been since he'd shared his story with anyone. So this land, Nathaniel observed thoughtfully, it saved you. Elijah considered. This, maybe. Or maybe it just gave me somewhere to hide. By midday, a compromise had been reached. King Nathaniel agreed to a brief medical examination and spent an hour handling the most urgent state business from Elijah's front porch, where a makeshift office had been assembled. Aides came and went, presenting documents for his signature, which he did with the help of a specially designed stamp and Anton's guidance for placement. Elijah watched from a distance, tending to his garden, oddly fascinated by this glimpse into a world so different from his own. The king worked with focused efficiency, asking incisive questions about policy details, occasionally dictating responses to diplomatic inquiries. When the work was done, Nathaniel dismissed his staff and called out to Elijah, "Would you show me the rest of your farm? I'd like to feel the sun a while longer." As they walked the property, Elijah guiding the king along the paths between fields, Nathaniel revealed pieces of his own story. He had been king for 27 years, ascending to the throne when his father died unexpectedly. He had lost his sight gradually to a degenerative condition, completely blind for the last decade. "The hardest part wasn't losing my sight," Nathaniel confided as they stopped by the apple orchard. "It was convincing everyone around me that I hadn't also lost my competence." "Is that why you wander off alone?" Elijah asked. Nathaniel laughed. "Partly. I also find that crowns and titles create barriers. People tell kings what they think kings want to hear. But when I'm just an old blind man, I hear truths otherwise hidden from me." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Last night, when you took me in, that wasn't charity to a king. It was kindness to a stranger. That's rare and valuable." Elijah shrugged, then remembered to speak his response. "It was just bread?" "No," Nathaniel said firmly. "It was more. You shared your space, your story. For a few hours, you let someone into the fortress you've built around your grief." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Elijah stopped walking, suddenly aware of how easily this stranger king, or not, had seen through him. As afternoon stretched toward evening, it became clear that the royal delegation would need to depart soon to maintain their diplomatic schedule. Staff packed up the impromptu office on the porch, while security did final checks of the vehicles. Anton approached where Elijah and Nathaniel sat on a bench near the garden. "Your Majesty, we must leave within the hour to reach Washington by nightfall." Nathaniel nodded. "Thank you, Anton. Please give us a few more minutes." When the chamberlain had withdrawn, Nathaniel turned to Elijah. "I must return to my duties, but before I go, I'd like to make you an offer." Elijah tensed. He had been expecting some kind of payment or reward, an awkward intrusion of money into what had been a simple act of hospitality. "That's not necessary." "Hear me out," Nathaniel said. "Vesaria has a proud agricultural tradition. Our Royal Agricultural College is renowned throughout Europe. Each year, we sponsor farmers from around the world to visit, learn our methods, and share their own knowledge." "I'm not looking to leave my farm," Elijah said firmly. "I'm not asking you to," Nathaniel replied. "Not permanently, but a month. In Vesaria, seeing different approaches to farming, exchanging ideas with others who understand the language of soil and seasons, it might offer perspective." Elijah was already shaking his head. "I appreciate the offer, but you've been hiding here for 7 years, Nathaniel interrupted gently. "I understand grief, Elijah. I lost my wife to cancer and my sight to disease. Different losses, but I recognize the instinct to withdraw, to build walls." He reached out, finding Elijah's shoulder with unerring accuracy. "The invitation remains open, not as repayment, but as an acknowledgement that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to step beyond the boundaries we've created." Anton reappeared, accompanied by 2 security officers. "The convoy is ready, Your Majesty." As they walked toward the gate, Elijah felt a strange reluctance. This bizarre interruption to his solitude should have been unwelcome, yet he found himself oddly affected by the blind king's presence and unsettled by his parting words. At the limousine, Nathaniel turned to Elijah one last time. "Think about it. Anton will leave contact information." Then, with the formal tone of his station, he added, "The Kingdom of Vesaria thanks you for your hospitality to its monarch." As the royal convoy prepared to depart, a young aide approached Elijah with an envelope. "His Majesty requested you have this," she said, her accent similar to Anton's. Inside was a handwritten note in elegant script, clearly penned by someone other than the blind king, but dictated by him. "The bread we break with others becomes part of our story. Thank you for making me part of yours, if only briefly. Remember, even the most carefully tended fields must sometimes be exposed to new seeds to remain vital." And Elijah stood at his gate long after the convoy had disappeared down the gravel road, the note still in his hand, the silence of his farm suddenly echoing in a way it never had before. 3 weeks passed. Autumn settled fully over Elijah's farm, painting the surrounding forests in russet and gold. He continued his routines, harvesting the last crops, preparing the fields for winter, splitting firewood for the cold months ahead. Yet something had shifted in the rhythm of his days. The king's note sat on his mantelpiece. Elijah found his, eyes drawn to it repeatedly. The elegant handwriting, a tangible reminder that his carefully constructed isolation had been breached. With the note was a business card, with a direct phone number for Anton and an official embossed invitation to the Royal Agricultural College of Vasaria. He told himself he would never use either. Yet he didn't discard them. On a crisp October morning, Elijah drove into Millfield for supplies, something he did only when absolutely necessary. At the general store, he was loading bags into his truck when he heard someone call his name. "Mr. Moore? Elijah Moore?" He turned to find Diane Lewis, who owned the local newspaper. He knew her only by sight, a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and alert eyes. "Sorry to bother you," she said, "but is it true you hosted the King of Vasaria at your farm? The European monarch who was just at the White House?" Elijah stiffened. "How did you hear about that?" "Small town," Diane said with a shrug. "Someone's cousin works security for the diplomatic corps in D.C. Said a king went missing during that big storm last month and turned up at a farm outside Millfield." She studied his face. "So it's true?" Elijah nodded reluctantly. "Would you consider talking to me about it? It would make a wonderful feature for our paper." "No," Elijah said firmly. "Nothing to tell. He needed shelter. I provided it." Diane looked disappointed, but nodded respectfully. "I understand. Still, it's a remarkable thing." She turned to go, then paused. "You know, we're having a harvest festival this weekend at the community center. First one since before the pandemic. You'd be welcome to come." Elijah muttered a non-committal thanks and finished loading his truck. As he drove home, his mind kept returning to the king's words. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to step beyond the boundaries we've created. That night, Elijah did something he hadn't done in years. He used the ancient computer that sat dusty in the corner of his living room, connected to the slow rural internet, and searched for information about Vasaria and its blind king. Saturday morning found Elijah standing before his bathroom mirror, razor in hand, staring at a face he barely recognized. He had avoided mirrors for years. They reminded him too much of the man he had been before, the husband and expectant father whose eyes had held hope. Carefully, he shaved off the beard he'd worn since Sarah's death. When he finished, he ran a hand over his smooth jaw, feeling oddly vulnerable. The face that looked back at him was older, lined by sun and grief, but somehow more like his former self than he had expected. He had told himself he was only going to the harvest festival to ask Diane Lewis not to publish anything about the king's visit. But as he drove into town, dressed in his cleanest shirt and jeans, he admitted there was more to it than that. The community center was decorated with corn stalks, pumpkins, and colorful gourds. Tables lined the walls, laden with homemade pies. preserves, and local produce for the charity auction. A small band played folk music in the corner. The room was filled with townspeople, many faces vaguely familiar to Elijah, though he'd made a point of not knowing names. He felt immediately out of place, the press of bodies and conversation, overwhelming after so much solitude. He was about to leave when an older woman approached him. "You must be Elijah Moore," she said, her smile warm. "I'm Martha Jenkins. My late husband and I owned the hardware store for 40 years. "Ma'am," Elijah nodded, uncertain how to respond. "I knew your wife," Martha continued gently. "Sarah used to come in for garden supplies. Such a lovely person. We were all heartbroken for you when she passed. Elijah, and now we'd love to hear from you. Why do you think the royal caravan came to his farm? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe to No Filter America, and help us keep these unforgettable stories alive.